So, Lewis Hamilton has finally signed a contract with Mercedes to race in Formula One during this season, 2021. I guess it wasn't something that most of us ever thought was in too much doubt, but the longer it went on, the more delays happened, the more questions it raised around commitment on both sides. What were the sticking points? Why was it taking so long? Today we got some answers around that commitment, but those answers, ironically, have only raised more and more questions about that very subject, commitment. The deal is a 1 year only deal. Lewis, at the moment, will only be in Formula One for one further season with Mercedes. Beyond that, nobody knows. That means that both of Mercedes drivers will be out of contract at the end of 2021. George Russell will be out of contract at Williams at around the same time. So you might say, okay, well, that frees up George to move over to the main factory Mercedes team. But what about Lewis Hamilton? This guy who is a current 7-time world champion, statistically the most successful driver of all time in the history of this sport. An ambassador for good beyond the walls of Formula One and its industry. What does it mean for Lewis Hamilton? Why has it taken so long? And why have, after all of these negotiations that have almost gone on for longer than the actual length of this contract extension itself, have we ended up with just simply a 1 year deal? Well, I don't want to ever go into too much speculation about what was going on in those negotiating rooms. What were those conversations? The truth is, none of us know. There have been all sorts of internet rumours about whether it was extra money being required, about a veto over who's his driving teammate within the team, all sorts of things about whether he gets his trophies, whether he gets a free Mercedes AMG car. I mean, all sorts of things, but they are simply rumours. The truth is, those are people writing things on the internet to gain some traction and some notoriety for their own websites. Nothing more than that. Because nobody involved in those conversations is putting that stuff out there. I mean, there are precedents where that stuff has happened, but in this negotiation between two such successful parties, Mercedes Formula One team and Lewis Hamilton, this was not about playing games in the media, trying to knock a couple of zeros off the end of a salary negotiation or anything like that. I think what we can surmise from what the statement says in today's press release is that clearly there was something around the length of the term of this contract. That clearly was one of the sticking points. What we don't really know is on which side of the table was that sticking point. Did Lewis want a longer term, or did Mercedes want a longer term, and have they somehow had to shorten that to appease one side or the other? And if you look at that, you could say, well, Lewis only needs 1 more year, effectively, to give himself the opportunity to take that final 8th world title that would put him beyond all doubt. He's currently tied at 7 world titles with Michael Schumacher. If he takes an 8th, and let's face it, 2021's a great opportunity to do that with some stability in the rules, with Mercedes in a great position to capitalise on the success that they've already built upon, to use the foundations that they've built over the last number of years to make sure that they remain at the top. After 2021, when we get into new regulations in 22, who knows what the pecking order will be? So from Lewis Hamilton's perspective, this is perhaps his best shot, his most guaranteed shot, if there is such a thing, at taking an 8th world title. If he gets an 8th world title in 2021, does he want to or need to continue in this sport where he will have smashed, by that point, pretty much every record there is to break? His legacy, in terms of his driving statistics, will be cemented in this sport forever. What does he want out of Formula One beyond an 8th world title? I would suggest, or I'd guess, that might be a turning point for Lewis Hamilton. He's got so many other outside interests that if he's able to tick that final box, he can go off and pursue some of those. What if he doesn't take the 8th world title in 2021? Well, there's nothing in this negotiation or this contract announcement today that precludes him from going beyond 1 further year. It's just that this current negotiation has only got him locked in for that period of time. If he's still at the top of his game, if he's still motivated, and if he still has something to drive him on, there's nothing really stopping him looking to continue. If you're Mercedes, what do you want? Do you want Lewis Hamilton for longer than a season, for a year? Well, from a commercial point of view, you do, because the commercial side of what Lewis brings to the table is as powerful as the sporting side that he's able to deliver in a car. If you can secure the greatest driver in the history of our sport to your team for an extra 3 years, the marketability off the back of that is huge. Let alone everything else that comes with Lewis, this push for diversification and sustainability, tying in with all the messages that Mercedes are trying to attach themselves to at the moment as well. The power of Lewis Hamilton goes way beyond what he can do when he's sat behind that steering wheel. So from a Mercedes perspective, that's attractive. What's not so attractive is the cost of that, the financial cost of that, the financial burden to the team of a Lewis Hamilton contract. And lots of people will argue what George Russell showed in his brief outing in that Mercedes factory team is that he can deliver some pretty extraordinary results at a fraction of the cost. Now, I'm certainly not saying that George Russell is in a position to do what Lewis Hamilton has been able to do over the last number of years for Mercedes. He's not yet, but he is undoubtedly the future of that organisation. So whether or not you could just take a like for like, swap out Lewis Hamilton for George Russell, is open for debate. Maybe on certain days, I don't believe, over the course of a season or over the course of a number of seasons, would he yet have the ability or the experience to deliver what Lewis Hamilton can deliver. He certainly doesn't have the marketing reach or draw that Lewis Hamilton does yet. So there are arguments on both sides for wanting different lengths of that contract. Lewis Hamilton could argue that having given so much to this sport, he would be desperate to try and hang on for another couple of years to at least experience the brand new Formula One coming in 2022, the new cars, the new rules. Most Formula One drivers will at least be massively intrigued by that, if nothing else. But for whatever reason, they have agreed to come to terms on a 1-year deal, potentially with options to extend it beyond. What's also interesting in this announcement today is that the statement says that a large part of the agreement they've come to is centred around a push for diversity and sustainability, which Lewis has driven and Mercedes have absolutely got on board with. They have, between the two of them, come to an agreement where the team will commit, presumably, a substantial amount of money and resource to establishing this new foundation, this new commission that will push in those areas. We know that's really important to Lewis. And I think, given what we've read today, it's those things that are perhaps the things that have been the more difficult parts of this negotiation. It's unlikely to be about Lewis Hamilton's salary. That won't be the biggest driver for him. It will be about what his legacy is beyond when he's left the team. Establishing this foundation that they have agreed on today means that Lewis Hamilton's presence, Lewis Hamilton's impact will be felt within this team and within this sport long after he stopped racing, after he stopped driving. And that, I feel, is something that's probably quite important to him. On top of all of that, I think as Formula One fans and as the human race that have an attachment to this sport of Formula One, we should be grateful for that. We've got a Formula One driver here who's not solely interested in taking as much as he can out of this sport, but now has an interest in giving something back, in establishing a future that looks different to the present that we've got in the sport, that has different people coming into the sport, that has more opportunity for different people, that opens these barriers that have been there for so long to a wider variety of more diverse people from more diverse backgrounds. That has to be a good thing. I think we should celebrate the fact that Lewis remains in the sport, that he remains with Mercedes-Benz, that we see these two powerhouses remain committed to each other, even if it is at the moment just for one further season. It means that we get one further season of seeing the most successful partnership that most of us have ever seen, certainly in the world of Formula One, operate at the very highest level. And for someone who's been involved in this sport at the very heart, the very centre of it, striving for that level of success, I can do nothing other than appreciate it whilst we're in the midst of it right now, knowing that we will probably miss it when it's gone.